Okay, welcome everyone to our Parsha Insights Shiur. We're looking at Parshat Chukat today, which is a fascinating Parsha. There's a lot that happens. We have fast forwarded really to the end of Bnei Israel's stay in the wilderness. And we're going to start by taking a look at a map. And you know what? I think the map that we all go to, or that I go to, Google Maps. So I think that's a good place to start. If you'll indulge me, we're looking at Google Maps, and believe it or not, this is not the story. This is not where the children of Israel landed. This is
Some did.
some of us did, but let's zoom out. Let's go on a little. We haven't been able to travel for the last while, so this will have to suffice. Okay, so we're going. Okay, so we can see in Egypt, one can certainly trace the Nile by virtue of the fertile land that surrounds the Nile. And just note that Goshen, where the children of Israel are residing and where they leave from, is right up around here, just north of Suez. That's the land of Goshen, and that's where our departure point is. Now, at the beginning of Parshat Beshalach, back in the book of Exodus, this is not the map that's on your sheet. We'll get to that map in a moment. That in the beginning of Parshat Beshalach, the verse says, "V'lo nacham," that God did not allow them to go the way of Derech Eretz Plishtim, the way of the land of the Plishtim, or the Philistines. Ki karovhu, that was very close. So the way of the Philistines is the coastal route, because the Philistines are dwelling in what is today's Gaza Strip. So this is Derech Eretz Plishtim, Ki karovhu. That would have been the straight journey. But rather, because God was afraid that Birotam Milchama V'Shavu Mitzrayma, that they would see war and would go right back to Egypt. And so instead they were sent down in this way. Where did they cross the sea? Well, there are 1,000 different opinions, whether it was right up here, north of the Suez Canal, whether it was in the Gulf of Suez, whether they wandered and ran down here, and one opinion has them crossing the sea right over here, south of what today is Eilat. But either way, they end up about in the south, in the southern Negev, which is the Midbar. There are two deserts that we're going to be talking about: Midbar Paran and Midbar Tzin. The desert of Tzin being the northern one, and they're going to launch the spies from around here, north into Israel. They're going to go right into Hebron, which is right down here between Beersheba and Jerusalem. Right, so the spies are going to be launched from somewhere around, I believe, around there, which is Kadesh Barnea, and we'll get to that in a moment. And then at the end of our journey, we're going to pick it up right around here, and they're going to travel here through the land of Moab and the Amorites, and then enter the land of Israel at Gilgal, which is just east of Jericho. So they're going to cross the Jordan right over here, around here, north of the Dead Sea. Okay, so that's in real time what the journey that we're looking at of Bnei Israel. Now let's look at it in the other map. Let me share the other screen. Okay, so this is giving. Okay, so the red dotted line is their first journey. After they get the Torah down in Egypt, they come up here, they send the spies from Kadesh, and then they're punished to wander in the desert, in the wilderness, for 40 years. And then they come back here. Aharon dies at Hor Hahar in our Parsha this week. And then we make our way, we're crossing two rivers, the river Zered and Arnon, and that's going to be this week's Parasha, is going to be this journey right here, including the story of the snake. Okay, so let's take a look in the verses, and we can always refer back to this map to try to understand a little bit better. But there are many. I mean, just in preparing this, I chose the map I thought that gave the greatest simplicity. But there are lots of great maps out there on all levels of detail, which will tell you every single stop that they took in these 40 years of wandering and where everything is. And it's actually fascinating. And the differences of opinion are fascinating as to where things are. And there are very few things that we know exactly where they are today. And presumably one of those is right over here, Hor Hahar, which is known as Petra. Right, that's where Aaron's tomb is in Jordan. That's a very popular day trip from Eilat. Right down here, people will go to Petra for the day and then go into Jordan to that spot, which is supposedly beautiful. I've never been there, but supposedly beautiful. Okay, so after Aaron dies, Vayisu me Hor Hahar. They go from Mount Hor. Derech Yam Suf. Lisvov et Eretz Edom. Okay, so now we can actually see this. They're going, right? If their goal is to get over here, again, it's all about what's the best path. So if the goal is to get here, they should go straight through, but no. They want to go around the land of Edom. They want to go Derech Yam Suf, the way of the Sea of Reeds. They want to go down towards Eilat, towards the Yam Suf, and go bloop up and around the land of Edom, where they're going to encounter the enemies. Okay, so that's the description. Vatiksar nefesh ha'am badarech. And the people got restive, I guess is the translation here, right? The people became impatient. Vayedaber ha'am be'elohim u'v'Moshe. So they spoke to God and Moses. Lama helitunu mimitzrayim lamut bamidbar. Why have you brought us out to Egypt to die in the desert? We've heard this before, by the way. This is not the first time they've made this complaint. Why did you take? But there is something that is significantly different here. And that is, the difference is that the people complaining here never lived in Egypt. The last time we heard this complaint was in year 1. They were complaining, why'd you take us out of Egypt? And here they're saying, why'd you take us out of Egypt? But we've never seen it. To die in the wilderness. Ki ein lechem ve'ein mayim. There's no bread or water. V'nafshenu katza, and our souls are really disdaining balechem haklokel, by this miserable food. The word klokel from the word klala, the kalel, to curse. This cursed food. We don't want it anymore. The manna. Vayishal, and there is one opinion, actually, the Chatam Sofer, which I didn't quote in detail, but the Chatam Sofer says, who are these people? They are people, again, who were born in the wilderness. This is the new generation. So the old generation said, oh, we miss the watermelons and the strawberries and whatever it was. We miss all the fruit of the land of Israel. We miss the figs, because perhaps they really had a taste for it, because they remember what it tasted like. This new generation has no idea what that food tastes like. They have only had manna their entire life, but now look at where they are. You saw the map? They're right on the border of the land of Israel. They can see the fruit trees. They can see the growth. And they're saying, here we are, stuffing our faces with this miserable manna when we could be having that stuff. The Chassam Sofer says their complaint is. Vayeshalach Adonai ba'am et hanechashim hasrafim. God sent venomous snakes. Vayinashchu et ha'am vayamat et rav mi Yisrael. They bit the nation and they killed a lot of people. Vayavo ha'am el Moshe, and the nation came to Moshe. Vayomru chatanu ki dibarnu v'Adonai v'avach. We have sinned because we've spoken against God and against you. We're sorry for complaining. Hitpalel el Adonai ve'yaser me'aleinu et hanachash. Please pray to God and get these snakes away from us. They say, by the way, the snake That's a linguistic concept speaking about a large that's in the singular. Really should be nechashim, like it was here, lots of little snakes. But there's a concept in linguistics called nomen zunatatis, which is using a singular to refer to a large quantity of things. Similar to in the plague of the second plague, it says Vata'al hatzfardea, that the frog came up. So just one frog? No. Lots of frogs, but it was a mass of frogs. So it was a mass of snakes that we're talking about. Vayitpalel Moshe ba'ad ha'am. And Moses prayed for the people. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe. So God said to Moshe, here's how you're going to fix it. Aseh lecha saraf v'simoto al nes. Make a snake, basically, of the same poisonous snake, and put it on a pole, on a nes, means literally a miracle. We use it, but the same word is used to refer to a flag or a flagstaff, is a nes in Hebrew. It's something that can be seen from afar. And so take that serpent, v'haya kol hanashuch, anyone who is bitten, v'ra'auto v'chai, will look at that snake and will live, will be revived. Vayas Moshe nechash nechoshet, so Moshe made a copper snake. Look at the similarity between the word nachash and nechoshet, the snake and the copper. Vayisimehu al hanes, and he stuck it up on top of the standard. Vahaya im nashach hanachash at ish, if a person was bitten by the snake, v'hibit al nachash hanachoshet v'chai, and he's going to look at the copper snake and will be revived. Okay, that's the story. That's the entirety of the story. The Mishnah uses this and says, or quotes this and says, by the way, anyone who says that the snake has powers is wrong. That the copper snake it's God who does. They simply were meant to look at the snake and be reminded of our responsibility to pray to God, and then they would be healed. It's not that there's not a magical snake. Of course, the who is it? The AMA who uses this, the American Medical Association, they use this as the symbol, the snake and the staff. This is a very popular sign of healing, and it comes from the Torah, from Moshe, who makes the copper snake and heals the people. So what exactly is going on? What is this miracle that's happening? Why was this an appropriate? We always look when there's a punishment for something, why it's an appropriate punishment. The people complain and they get bitten by snakes. And it makes for a very lovely horror movie, but it, what exactly is the connection, and why suddenly is looking at, and I'm sure that there's science in this. I'm sure that we could talk about vaccine technology and understand how one can be healed by a semblance of the very thing that harms. Could it be that they were building up antibodies by looking at the snake, at the copper snake, and thereby able to fight off the venom of the actual snakes? I don't know. There could be something scientific to discuss here, but what exactly is happening? And that brings us to Rav Hirsch. And Rav Hirsch says the following, a very beautiful concept. Rav Hirsch says that God sent venomous serpents among the people. God didn't dispatch serpents, but rather he released the serpents that were already there and didn't hold them back. Right? It's not that God suddenly waved God's magic wand and created snakes. The snakes were part of nature. The miracle was that for 40 years they didn't bite anyone. That was the miracle, that they walked through the desert. And can you imagine that these, I don't know if he's going to say this right now, maybe, but I don't think Rav Hirsch is going to say this explicitly, but imagine the experience of people growing up in the wilderness, these children who are now adults. And what are snakes? They are these cute little things that have never bit anyone, that don't cause harm. I don't know, cute little things, but they are these harmless things. The wilderness is filled with all these animals that have no ability to harm them, and therefore they coexist beautifully. Oh, look, a snake. just like a grain of sand. It's just part of nature that's there that has no negative effect on us. But now, God let them go. And the desert serpents followed their natural tendencies and they started to bite the people. The protection was no longer there. Moshe described thus the wilderness through which they passed in a miraculous manner without being harmed. God, who led you through that great and terrible wilderness in which there are venomous snakes, that's in Devarim, he said, thus we see that the venomous serpents are a natural element of the desert, just like drought. And the serpent's bite has the sole purpose of letting the people see the dangers which dog a person's steps when he goes through the wilderness, and that it was only the miraculous power of God which had hitherto kept them far from them. So far, indeed, that one didn't even have the idea of their existence. One who had been bitten had only to fix the image of a serpent firmly in his mind, so he realizes that even when God's gracious power will again keep them at a distance, he'll remember that the danger is still in existence. Dangers that the special care of God daily and hourly allow us to escape quite unconsciously. And so Rav Hirsch beautifully puts it all together. He said the people complained. Why did the people complain? Because they had forgotten just how special the manna was. Because they look at the other side of the fence. They literally look in the land of Israel, or they hear the stories from their parents that their parents told about Egypt, and they say, things used to be really amazing. Or over there, they have it better. How come we have to eat this lechem that is this cursed bread? How come we have to eat this terrible manna? But you know, and I know, and we know that manna was extraordinary. It was beyond special. It was God's gift to them. How could they have become so blind to the fact that God every day was creating this manna for them? Not only that, God every day was protecting them from the environment around them. This people wandered through the desert 39 years, no snake bites, not one. And suddenly God said, you know what? I'm going to withdraw my protection for just a few moments, and let's see what happens. And so the snakes come in, and they must have been hungry after 39 years of not biting people. These snakes must have been pretty ravenous. And suddenly the snakes come in and bite the people. And all you have to do is look at that snake and remember, that snake would be dangerous if it weren't for God's protection. So that's Rav Hirsch. That's his very beautiful explanation of the snake bite. I want to any comments on this Rav Hirsch?
I was just curious, the source of this. Does this come from a Horeb commentary?
This source comes from a book, Rav Hirsch on the Torah, which is an edited version of Horeb.
Right.
There used to be the Saraf was more positive, like angelic, and here you have Nechashim Usparim together.
Yeah. So there is and I don't know the connection between them. You're right to point this out, Tamara, that there is an angel we call the Saraf. Srafim v'ofanim, all different types of angels. That's called the Saraf. And here the word is used, as I believe it is in modern Hebrew, to refer to venom. And I don't know the connection between the two of them, but you're right to point it out.
Rabbi, when you say that, it reminds me of, what is it, the Chayot, the rest of is Chayot HaKodesh.
Exactly.
And when I'm thinking of Chayot, I was thinking, frankly, of the Chavrei Knesset. After, I could only think of Chayot, and I was thinking of the contrast.
Well, yeah, we talk about Chayot HaKodesh. Those are the ones we try to be, not the. I know, but not the Vilda Chayas. Yeah. Okay. Let's jump into to the next verses, really. So we left off here in verse 9, and we're now going to continue with the next number of verses. And let me give you a warning. These next verses include a short poetic section. And biblical poetry is often very difficult to understand. And we're going to focus on a very few poetic words and come to a few different understandings of them. And I think it's very interesting. I hope you do too. So here we go. Just consider yourselves forewarned. Okay. So
I just want to
Vayisu,
say the Hebrew is so poetic, and if you try to follow it on the map, forget it. But,
exactly.
it's beautiful. It's beautiful in the Hebrew. It really
Yes,
is.
100%. So Vayisu b'nei Israel. So now they're continuing after this Nechoshet thing. So I'm sorry, going back to our map. So the Nechoshet happened here south of, remember the river Zared or Zered, and now they're going to go to the next places, Ovot and Iyeh Havarim, and we're going to see these places, and other maps will include all of them. Okay, so Vayisu me Ovot. They go to a place called Ovot, and then they go from Ovot, and there's a place in modern Hebrew, in modern Israel. When you drive down to Eilat, you'll see a sign for Ovot. It's named after it, maybe not the same place, but named after Vayisu me Ovot vayachanu be'iyeh ha'avarim, and they camp in another place, Iyeh ha'avarim, bamidbar asher al pnei Moav, mimizrach hashamesh. So now they're on the eastern part of the Moabite territory. Misham nasa'u, vayachanu benachal zared. So they went from there, and now they are on, right? So they went from the east of the Moabite territory down here, kind of from the east, and they're crossing the Zered River. Okay, let's continue. Misham nasa'u, then they go from the Zered River. Vayachanu me'ever Arnon, beyond Arnon, asher bamidbar, that was in the wilderness. Hayotze migvul ha'emori, that protrudes from the territory of the Amorites. So we're going to look at the Emori, which are going to be a little bit to the north. Ki Arnon gvul Moav, because Arnon is the border, bein Moav u'bein ha'emori, between these two nations, the Moabites and the Amorites. Okay, so to go back for a moment, they are now crossing this river right over here. This river is the border between the ancient Moabites and the ancient Amorites. So we are now right over here, having crossed the river. And this is where something interesting happens, because something happened. We don't know what happened, but something happened right about here. And we're going to see it's quite a magnificent thing that happened, quite an interesting thing that happened. So now they've crossed the river, and you have two poetic verses here. Al kain ye'amer, therefore it will be said, B'sefer milchamot Adonai, in the book of the wars of God. What's going to be said? The following. Et vahev basufa. Your translation here, if you're looking at the translation, you're not going to get much help here. Et vahev basufa, translate Waheb and Sufa. I don't know who got paid to translate that, but I could have done that. Vahev basufa, ve'et hanechalim Arnon, and the rivers or the wadis are known. Ve'eshed hanechalim, and the tributary wadis, asher nata l'shevet or, which leaned towards Ar. Ar was the capital of I believe the Emori. V'nishan li gvul Moav, and hug the territory of Moab. Okay, and we're going to try to understand all of this. Okay, so just to look, before we get into the meaning of the words, to look at, for some familiar words, I just want to point out here that this word basufa is connected to the Hebrew word Yam Suf. Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds. And the commentaries are going to understand that this is a reference to the Sea of Reeds that the children of Israel crossed. So this is going to be some historical reference, okay? So again, we are on the other side of the river Arnon, and we're saying, okay, this moment is going to be recorded in history. But what happened? What is it that's going to be recorded in history? So we need Rashi. Oh, I quoted the same thing again. We need Rashi. So Rashi says, okay, we saw that line at Vahev, at Vahev Basufa. Rashi says Bahev comes the word Yahev, because Rashi says that you can never have a word, or rarely have a word, that the root starts with the letter Vav. It has to start with a Yud. We don't have those verbs in Hebrew where it start with the letter Vav. Vav is a prefix. The word in the Torah that starts with the letter Vav is the word Vav, which means a hook. It's spelled Vav Vav. It means a hook, and it takes on the shape. A hook takes on the shape of letter, so it's called a Vav. So at Yahev, Rashi says, and he gives an example as to how a Vav can, another example, how Vavs and Yuds are interchangeable. So, and the word Yahav in Hebrew is to give. To give in ancient Hebrew, and in Aramaic as well. Hav, give. You know a word that's connected to it?
Havenu Shalom.
Hevenu is to bring, and Philip, the romantic, to love is to give. So that's all the same word. Yahav, love, give. So now we read this back in. So they're going to write in the book of the word that God gave at Yamsuf and the rivers of Arnon. So it seems to be that there's going to be some equivalency between Yamsuf, the Sea of Reeds, the miracle of the crossing of the sea, and this wadi, or this river of, or this valley of Arnon that they just crossed. So this is pretty amazing, because the verse is telling me that something amazing just happened. And by the way, it was as amazing as it was what God gave the people at Yam Suf. Now my interest is really piqued. Now I really want to know what happened. So now here Rashi comes in and says exactly what happened. Rashi says the word Eshed HaNechalim. The Eshed, he says, Rashi, Targum Shel Shefech, Lishpoch is to pour, is Eshed. Shefech HaNechalim, that the pouring forth in the valleys. By the way, just for the linguists amongst us, what Rashi is really saying is quite dramatic. Rashi is saying that this word is Aramaic, that the word in the Torah, Eshed, is not a Hebrew word, but an Aramaic word. Eshed HaNechalim. What poured forth? So look what Rashi says. Shenishpach sham dam Emorim. The blood of the Amorites was spilled there. Shahayu nechpaim sham, that the Amorites, keep in mind the ones in the north, were hiding there. Lefi shahayu haharim gvoim, because the mountains were high. V'hanachal amok, and the valleys were deep. V'katzar, and they were narrow. V'harim smuchim zelazeh, so you have two mountains that are close to each other. Adam omed al har mizeh, that a person could stand on one mountain in one country, Emori, in the Amorite kingdom, and speak to a friend who is in the other country across the board. And there was a little valley, a thin valley right between them, right? Vahaderech over betoch hanachal, and the path went right through the valley. The children of Israel then are, going right through the valley. And if you ever watch the Westerns, that when you walk through a valley, what's going to happen up top? The natives are going to shoot down. That's what happens in the valleys. You're exposed to the elements, and the people who are familiar with the territory will go all the way up top and shoot down. And that's exactly what happened. So they said, Amru Emorim, so the Amorites said, when the Israelites come through the land and go right through that valley, we're going to hide in the caves that's in our mountain, above them. We're going to kill them. We're going to shoot down at them, and we're going to kill them, said the Amorites. And there were caves on the side of Moab, Uvahar shel tzad Amorim, but on the Amorite side, Hayu keneged otan nekaim, opposite those caves were kamin kranot v'shadayin boltin lachutz. They were like horns or breasts that were protruding from the mountain. So you have to keep in mind that it was almost like a puzzle. On one side were caves, on the other side were protrusions. Like they had all been part of the same, almost like Lego pieces, right? One fit right into the other. And so what happens? Kevan Shabau Yisrael La'avor, when the Israelites came to pass, Nizda'azah hahar shel Eretz Yisrael, keshivcha hayotzet lahakbil pnei girvata. There was this amazing, there was like this earthquake, the shaking that was happening. V'nit karev letzad hahar shel Moav, and one side went into the other. And keep in mind what happened. What do you think happened? The Amorites were inside the cave, and because the protrusions went into the cave, they were crushed. And to get even more graphic, what happens when they're crushed? There's blood. Where does the blood go? It goes down into the valley. It goes out the river. And so that's what it means, the verse, Eshed HaNechalim, the pouring forth in the valleys, was the blood of the Amorites who tried to ambush the Israelites. Now, I did something fun, which I wanted to share with you, which is, let's go back to our map. We were right here. And we're looking at Nachal Arnon now, which is Wadi al-Mujib, which means the positive river. And you can take a look. This is the river we're talking about. And let's go to Google View, because some people have taken pictures right here for us. So let's take a look what it looks like today. Okay, so okay, let me find a different. Oh, so you can see you have this valley in between these two mountains. Let's take a look at a different one even. Maybe there'll be one that's, these are great. So this is, the children of Israel are passing through down here. One side is Moab, one side is Amori. You have the protrusions on one side and the indentations on the other. I got very excited by this when I can use Google Maps to understand the Parsha better. But this is your protrusions. This is your, this is where they're passing. Okay, that is your, let's see if we have a different view also. So this is your path that the children of Israel are crossing through and over, and on one side you have the attack, and on the other side, and what God did for a moment was to bring them together, these two mountains, let them kiss for a moment, so that the people in the caves would be crushed and the blood would flow out. And that was the great miracle at Nachal Arnon.
Rabbi,
Yes.
it's a very improbable story.
Mm-hmm.
Very probable from a geomorphological point of view. That canyon was carved by water. The Israelites moving on the floor of that canyon were in fact moving either on a waterbed, or it was highly drought season, which is possible.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea of an earthquake creating forces on either side of the canyon that would bring these two sides together, and then the force being released, is, from a physics point of view, highly improbable. So what's behind the high improbability? What is the narrative trying to tell us?
That's a fantastic observation, and I think a very true observation, that many of these miracles are, from a physics scientific perspective, impossible, improbable, unprecedented. Wait, before I venture an answer, Susan would like to say something. Go ahead, Susan. Well, I can't hear you, Susan.
Yeah, okay, Rabbi, you know I work in stone, I'm a sculptor. So what I saw in that passageway,
Ooh.
what I saw is that there was a crack. There was an earthquake
Hmm.
that opened up that passage. And that's why you could almost fit one side into the other.
Yeah.
That's what I,
Yeah, it
So-
looked as if they were, they at one point
Split.
had known each other.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but look, we are ascribing meaning to
Yeah.
the children of Israel's successful passage through a very dangerous territory.
yeah,
And
I
that's
stood
all.
there.
That's all I think we have to say about, they had experienced the sea split, and they had experienced salvation from the Egyptians. Somehow they're making it to the land of Israel in spite of everything that happened, including the plagues, including all, on the way. And at every point, it's because God is intervening on their behalf. So here too-
Probably we have all, because we've probably all been on missions to Israel. We've
Mm.
all been there.
yeah,
We've all been in that very place.
Yeah.
I know I stood up on something and looked into what became Israel.
So this today
Yeah.
is on the east side of the Dead Sea, which would be in today's Jordan, but
Yeah.
in the land of Israel according to the biblical boundaries, because remember there were 2.5 tribes that settled on the east side of the Jordan, and this I believe was in the land of Gad or Manasseh or Reuven. I'm not sure which one this later became when they settled the land. But I don't have a good answer, Peter, other than to say that this is being written as a way of understanding and appreciating God's role in their salvation. Because, looking back on it, as we often do in life, we look back and with wonderment and say, how in the world did I just make it through that unscathed? How did I just accomplish that? So, and there are always scientific approaches to every aspect of the Torah. And by the way, this is not in the Torah. Those verses, the poetic verses, are part of the Torah. The story is in Rashi. So as opposed to the crossing of the sea, which is a biblical text, this is not a biblical text. This is Rashi's way of understanding the poetry of the pouring forth of the valley. And Rashi says, you know what happened? These people hid in the caves, and the caves came together and crushed them. And it is a midrashic story, but your question applies to any of the miracles of the Torah, not just this one. So you can always, venture an explanation and say that the certain minerals gave the red color to the, in that particular season, the activity, the mineral activity gave, a certain hue to the water, and that they thought it was blood, but it really was sediment, or whatever it might be. We can always venture those rationalistic answers, but what Rashi is asking us to entertain for a moment is that they are saying a prayer for a miracle that happened to them. What that miracle was, so we know what Rashi's guess is, based on a midrash. But that's a non-answer to an excellent question. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Rabbi, are you saying when that poetry, are you saying that was said by the Jews, or those are words that were said by the Jews?
It's word that's said by the Torah. It says, Al-Kain Ye'amer, therefore it will be said in the book of the wars of God. So it's not that in the name of Moses or in the name of the children of Israel. This is the Torah itself that is telling us. Let's go back into the text. The Talmud in Kiddushin has a different approach to the I'm just hearing a little bit of echo. So maybe if people can just
Hey,
mute for a moment. Okay, great. So another use of this verse, and I want to show just two different sides of the verse. So Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba. So we'll read this in English from the Talmud tractate Kiddushin. Even a father and his son, or a rabbi and his student who are engaged in Torah together in one gate, b'sha'ar echad, become enemies with each other. You're studying Torah together, you fight. Right? Ze'im zeh. She'enam zazim misham. They don't move there until shena'asim ohavim, until they love each other. And the proof text, you fight, but you don't leave until there's love. How do we know? Because ve'et vahev basufa, vahev from the word love, and basufa not from the word suf, like yam suf, like the Sea of Reeds, but from the word sof, at the end. There has to be love at the end. And the implication is, remember the beginning of this verse, it shall be stated in the book of the wars of God. So Rashi, who we saw before, says, what are the wars of God? Those are the wars against the Amorites. Those are the wars against the Moabites. The Talmud says, what are the wars of God? Those are the battles over the truth of Torah. Those are the battles that take place in the Beit HaMidrash, in the house of study, when you're fighting, and when you're going to war for your truth, and when you're yelling, and when you're shouting, and when you're trying to get to the point, to the one point, to an understanding of the text. That's the Milchamot Hashem. That's the war of God. And there has to be ahava basof, vahev basufa, right? So Rashi sees this word vahev basufa as meaning what God did to us, what God gave us at the Sea of Reeds. The Talmud says that vahev basufa means that there has to be love at the end. And therefore, it's referring to this. So you have two completely different understandings of one verse, of one poetic verse. One is military, and the other is allegorical, talking about this Torah study. One's talking about war, one's talking about Torah study. Right? That's it. And the last source I wanted to bring was one that brings them together. And this is going to be a cornerstone of a certain outlook in life. And there's something very beautiful to it. In the book of Psalms, it says, we're looking at the Midrash on this, and we'll close with that. LeDavid riva Adonai et yirivai. God, a psalm of David, God, fight with my enemies. Strive with my adversaries. Lecham et lochamai. Fight my wars, right? Give battle to my foes. Hachzek magen letzina. Take up shield and buckler. V'kuma be'ezrati, and come in my defense. So this is an unusual verse because this goes against our understanding of what we need to do for ourselves. We need to fight our own fights. Are you sending God out to fight our fights for us? To beat up the bullies? To protect us? No. We need to be self-sufficient. We need to stand on our own. God, fight my fights for me? What's happening here? So that's what the Midrash says. Yachol eved basar vadam. Can a servant, a human servant, lomar laba'alav, say to their master, Riva adoni oivai, master, go fight my battles for me. Take care of my problems. V'tzei v'hilachem alai. No, the servant doesn't say that to the master. The master says that to the servant. We don't send God out to do our dirty work. God sends us out to fight the fight. No. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Amar LeDavid. God said to David, to King David, Asok b'Torah, study Torah, va'ani lochem et milchamtech, and I will fight your battles. You study Torah, I will protect you. God says to David. Moshe Omer. That's what Moshe says. Al Kain Ye'amer. Therefore, it will be said, B'Sefer Milchamot Hashem, in the book of the wars of God. What are the wars of God? Those are the battles that God fights for us. Im asaktem b'Torah shenichtava b'Sefer. If you embrace the concept of Sefer, of the book, then you have Milchamot Hashem. Then you have the wars of God. Ani nilcham al yidechem. I'll fight for you. Therefore, David said, Lekach amar David, Riva Hashem et Yeriva. That's how David says, God, fight my battles. It's not God fight my battles. It's God, we have a deal. I'm going to do what you want me to do. And in exchange for that, will you please protect me? So this is almost a way of bringing those two first approaches together. Because remember, Rashi said that this whole thing is talking about military. Rashi said this whole thing is talking about the war. God, it shall be written in the book of the wars of God. That's the war between the Amorites and the Moabites and the children of Israel, military. The Talmud says, what's the book of the wars of God? That's the fight for the truth of Torah, which happens in the study halls. And we have to love each other at the end, but we have to also be prepared to go to battle for the truth and for the Torah. And then you have the Midrash and Tehillim, which brings it together. You want God to protect you, you want God to be there as a shield for you, then you have to be there in the Beit Midrash for God. You have to be there b'Sefer in order to merit to have Milchamot Hashem. Now, I want to say that to take this to an extreme would be to say, I do not need to serve my country. All I need to do is sit with my book open and God will protect me. That's an extreme way of understanding this concept. A less extreme way of understanding this concept is that if I stay true to my core identity and to my faith, then I will merit that extra protection of God, but that doesn't mean I don't have to fight myself. That doesn't mean, can you imagine if this became the slogan of any country, let alone Israel, which is, okay, all young men, ages 20 and up, go to the library. God will protect us. You go study Torah. No worries. That's what the Midrash says. Open the book, open the Sefer, Milchamot Hashem. The wars belong to God. Obviously, that's an unsustainable, untenable reality. But and I don't mean to endorse that, but rather to say that the Midrash is making a very creative reading of this phrase, Sefer Milchamot Hashem, the book of the wars of God, to say these are two different concepts. One is you engage in the book, and the other is that God fights your fight. God stands up for you, which certainly is an aspiration, certainly is a hope to have that extra protection of God. So we've looked, in summation, we looked today at a very interesting comment of Rav Hirsch on what exactly the snakes were doing. And it was actually snakes were just being snakes. And the reason that the miracle was that they weren't snakes for 39 years, that the children of Israel passed through the desert and didn't know of this danger. And the same thing about the manna, and the same thing, and the whole thing was just to remind them that God is protecting them every day and is there for them every day. And don't forget that. Look at the snake and realize that the fact that it didn't bite you for all those years means that God protected you. That was what was Rav Hirsch. And then we looked at the continuation of the journey in the wilderness, and that something special happened when they passed through Arnon, when they passed from the border of the Moabites into the land of the Amorites. Something special happened. And we see a number of different attempts to try to articulate what the special thing that happened was, in different ways of explaining those poetic words, et vahev vasufa. And that's it for today for Parasha Chukat. Thank you very much.
Good.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure. Just a moment of housekeeping is that we're going to be taking a break for a few weeks. And I will be in touch about when we will resume. But I was convinced today to take a break for a few weeks. So
Good idea for you.
Thank you. So I think
Rabbi, maybe right after Tisha B'Av or so?
yeah, hopefully, and my
You need
ambition,
it.
my ambition, thank you. My ambition is that we'll come back with a new vision for, we've been focusing on Rav Hirsch and the Chatam Sofer, and we've gone through a cycle and a few weeks. This is the second time we did Chukat, and we've been, through one cycle plus about a month with the same concept. And I think we're going to try to embrace a different approach to the Parsha when we come back. Variety is good. So thank you all.
Rabbi, I missed what you said. Is there a class? Is there a
Thank
class
you.
next week?